every business owner, executive, entrepreneur knows where they hurt, right? So what are the systems involved with that hurt? And how can we begin to lay the foundation to alleviate that pain?
Let me ask you this, Colin, because I know this is way before I started this company. So we're talking like 2011. I did marketing for an industrial orifice company. That was exciting.
Okay.
Let me tell you.
Okay.
So like everything was the architecture they were operating on was very old. It was all Microsoft.NET framework and a lot of things like that. And I'm curious, how much money are companies losing by operating on kind of old data systems? Like how much of a problem is that?
Oh, it's hard to equate a lot of times because there's so many nuances. But what I typically, for manufacturing, to use your industrial example, the biggest measure that you can use is your throughput. Because at the end of the day, the only purpose of a manufacturing or industrial organization, anything with a supply chain, is taking raw materials or raw inputs and getting them out the door to customers, right? And it's typically easiest to identify along that value chain where things fall off. Either we have a lot of rework that has to go on prior to getting things tagged and sent out the door, or we have a really hard time getting things out the door. And so we look for the biggest gaps in that immediate value chain because that's what the core focus of the business is. That's the business's mission. And we look to begin measuring those gaps and looking for room for improvement.
So are you guys looking for like efficiencies? Like, okay, like we're taking way too long in this step, or, maybe this step costs us too much, or like those are the kind of outpoints you're looking for?
Yeah. So one good example for you, we have a customer in Florida. They do about $50 million a year, both on the consumer and the defense side.
Sure.
And they have a terrible issue with orders being fulfilled, what we call in full. So boxes get packed, orders get assembled, stuff gets sent out the door, and then you realize, oh my gosh, we only sent 25% of that customer's total order. They're going to be upset, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with they have a lot of process around Customs and Border Patrol to get things sent out the door internationally and hazardous material declarations. We found that the gap there was causing a nearly 30% error rate. So if you have two people responsible for getting orders out the door, right? And then one order comes to you and you go, well, this isn't right. Well, now, Jeremy, you need to handhold that order all the way back through the process by yourself. So not only is your time spent on that one order, you also leave your single colleague to handle the rest of the throughput. So you can see quickly how those levers really affect the ability to get things out the door. And that customer came to us and said, look, we're growing like a weed, and that's a great problem. But if we don't solve this within the next 6 to 9 months, we're going to hit a brick wall and be unable to fulfill orders anywhere near where we need to be.
Yeah, my dad, and this is before he retired now because he's in his 70s at this point, but he did quality control for a defense contractor. Mm-hmm. So like basically he's the guy that they sent in when they shipped out a lot of things they shouldn't ship out. And I think people don't consider like the amount of like lost profit you have in these different centers unless you handle them, right? Like, are we not shipping out the right product? Are we shipping out too much product? Are we shipping out bad product? Like that's a really big problem, man.
Right. Especially if your product carries any sort of weight. And I mean physical weight, right? We have a customer who's a manufacturer of toilets, sinks, bathtubs. Gosh. If you send out the wrong color bathtub across the country and that thing weighs 500 pounds, there's not enough money left over at the end of that value chain for you to actually take the product back to pay for the return. So they were finding themselves saying, you know what? Keep it, use it for another customer. We'll send you another unit with the right color. Hopefully we get it right this time. But think about that. If that happens 10 times a year, 1,000 times a year, 10,000 times a year, how quickly those costs spiral out of control. That's your value chain opportunity cost, and the cost of inefficiency is massive.